Okay, so I quickly want to make a video about two very simple, straightforward, but good sounding ways you can use the altered scale in your playing. And I also wanted to touch on its relationship to the tritone substitute and how we might think about it from a Barry Harris perspective. But the altered scale is a very common jazz education trope. It crops up in the chord scale system, but it's been around for a while, actually, I think, and has a few different names. It can be called the altered scale, obviously, the Superlocrian, the half-whole whole tone or diminished whole tone scale, or the Pomeroy scale. But most often it's referred to as the altered scale, so that's the context, that's the name I'm going to use today. And we're going to define it in a very simple way. It's just what happens if you take a major scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, and what you do is you flatten every note apart from the 1. 1, flat 2, flat 3, flat 4, which you often think of as a 3, flat 5, flat 6, flat 7, 1, and that gives you kind of a scale which both includes, by misspelling actually, the dominant 7, flat 5 arpeggio, but it also has some interesting upper extension-y tension things, like flat 9s, flat 13s, and of course flat 5s, which we can use to enrich a dominant chord. So what I wanted to sort of talk about very quickly is what is the altered scale actually doing? Because if we are playing a minor like a major 2-5-1, for instance, D minor, G7, C major, perhaps the most obvious way we would play that is diatonically, so we might, express the chords. Now that's how I might normally play it in a very vanilla way, and you'll notice that I'm playing the arpeggios, but I've also got like some lower neighbour chromatic tones, which I'm using just to spice it up a bit. And to me, the altered scale is taking all of those sort of extra notes and turning them, well, almost all of them, into a scale. So by which I mean these sorts of things where you have this very common rundown where you might go, from the point of view of the key of C major, you might be thinking flat 7, flat 6, 5, into the 5, or a wraparound. So I think of it 4, or a surround as Barry Harris calls it, 4, sharp 2, 3, very, very common. And you get this a lot in bebop, which is flat 2, 7, 1. And then, so the thing is, if you take all of those notes, apart from the target major notes in the C major chord, then what you actually end up with is this altered scale on G this time. So it's 1, 1, flat 2, flat 3, 3, flat 5, flat 6, flat 7, 1, that. So B, do, da, si, do, za, ya, da, si, do, bom, sa, ya, da, bi, zo, pa. Just by doing that, just by taking the altered scale and then resolving it to the third of the next chord, I've already got a line, right? Sa, ya, da, za, sa, ya, do, bom, which is different. Ya, ba, da, zo, bom, or I can change da, ya, da, ya, da, da, sa, ya, do, ya, do, do. That doesn't work rhythmically, you might try da, da, ya, bi, zo, bom, like that, or you might go da, ya, si, ya, bi, zo, bom. We might go za ba ba si zo za di boom. Now this is where it gets a bit interesting, because what I did there is not actually in the altered scale, but you can do it anyway. You can add in the lower neighbour, and that sounds fine. So in this case I'm using this note here, which is an F sharp, which you would not find in the G altered scale, okay, because it's presumably because it's meant to clash against that G7, although I think it sounds fine if you resolve it. So We'll touch again on that later, but I just wanted to sort of just give you the sort of straight up most obvious example I can think of a melodic minor mode of this kind, with the altered scale being used in bebop, and that's from George Shearing's tune Conception, and it comes into the B section, and it's basically a B7 going to E major 7th. So it goes there. So is that? Took a while to find that. So you can see that it's just a B altered scale going down to the 1 of the altered scale, which happens to be the 5th of E major 7th, which is a chord tone. Very, very simple way of resolving that. Okay, so that's the most obvious way of using it, but cat from scratching my sofa. So that's a very clear way of using that. And already just by using it as a scale, especially as a descending scale. Okay, so now harmonically, what differentiates that from what we might normally do in a minor key, which is using... Let's take it into C, so it's a comparison. So we might play, for instance, on the G7 flat 9, flat 13, we might play C harmonic minor. The difference that the alto scale really gives you is the flat 5 on the chord. Ya da da, si so bom, that kind of sound. So da ya si, or whereas the harmonic minor will be da ya da bom bom, da ya ne do de. So that's one way to hear it. Ya, and if you resolve up to a ninth, ya. 11's like that resolution, but it also works in bebop as well, right? So you're kind of adding in an extra note above the usual minor key choice, which will just sort of edge the harmony out of the key slightly. And this is a very bebop sound. If you don't know what I'm talking about, by the way, I would suggest checking out the Ronnie Ben Hur video on minor blues, where he talks about a lot of this kind of stuff. But that sound, that like that, is really beboppy. Okay, so that's the way you can use the alto scale very simply, just in small snatches. And in this sense, we're using it almost like a melodic device, although it does imply harmony. It implies all these sorts of, all those sorts of things. It really is also kind of working melodically as a cadence, melodically, if that makes any sense. I'm not just repeating myself over and over again, which I probably am. So, in terms of the last thing we need to think about with the alto scale is structurally it's a bit odd, because most of our chord scales sort of start with your basic 3-note chord, so basic 4-note chord, in this case a major 7th, and then add the upper tensions on top. Let's do it with the C major. So yeah. Same with most of the common modes like Lydian dominant, Dorian, and that's so on and so forth. Whereas the alto scale doesn't really do that. It kind of starts off with a half diminished, and then goes into the upper structure, which happens to be in the key of G, an A flat minor major 7th. And actually, if we go from here, if we go from the 7th of the G7 and then play on top of it a flat 9 minor major 7th chord, so in this case we play the note F and then we go into A flat minor major 7th, we actually have both guide tones of the G7 there, so that works really nicely. So I mean, you get this kind of arpeggio, which I suppose you could view either as being an F minor 7 flat 5 with a natural 9th in, or you could see it as being a flat minor 6 with a major 7th on top. I tend to like the second idea because it seems simpler. So if I'm playing like on C7, for instance, I could play sound. That will give me most of the altered sound, most of the interesting notes. It doesn't have the flat 5 in it, so yeah. So that's yeah. So I mean, that's a few sort of examples of things which you can extract from the altered scale and you find very useful. So in the case of doing a 2-5-1, I might go. So that's an example how you can do it using an arpeggio. A very good example of that is the melody from A Night in Tunisia. And then got that wraparound right at the end. So have a look at that melody. It's basically based on a G flat minor arpeggio over an A7. Okay. Lastly, I think like one thing I've realised is that actually if you use, instead of using a straightforward altered but use like a D flat Mixolydian, you get that note, which is in this key would be an F sharp going to G, right? Actually gives you all the wrapping around. Okay, and you can sort of use that in conjunction with the altered scale to create lines that resolve even more satisfyingly. So you're kind of using, if you like, the A flat melodic minor and the A flat Dorian together, for instance, or the because there's no G in that scale, you can't have a G mode that has both, but it would be like using the D flat Mixolydian and the D flat Lydian dominant together. So it's almost nicer to think of that. So I don't know. So let's for instance. So I wasn't very good. Okay. Okay, so thanks for watching. I hope you found it interesting. It's difficult to boil everything down into a short video, everything I want to share, but hopefully that will be interesting to you. Thanks for watching.